and welcome to another episode of the CEO Pick. I am Dave Osh, the CEO of Varnings, which sponsors this show. We partner with leadership teams to co-create high-value performance in high complexity and adaptive change at an all-inclusive and affordable monthly subscription. The CEO Pick is a video podcast devoted to sharing the thought leadership of successful mid-market CEOs. Such a leader is our guest today, Rob Castaneda, the founder and CEO of ServiceRocket. ServiceRocket is a Silicon Valley-based company that changes the way that fast-growing software companies engage with their customers for successful implementation. ServiceRocket helps software companies and their customers get the most out of their software. It provides a unique cloud-based platform, products and service across training, support, implementation, and tools. I invited Rob to the show after reading his article, Clean the Floor Like a CEO. And this article truly represented for me the essence of servant leadership. When needed, Rob will water the office plants. Rob has grown ServiceRocket to almost 240 employees strong over the last 19 years without external investors. He is the only CEO I have ever seen on a LinkedIn profile put their first job as a trolley pusher at IKEA. And it feels that in many ways this job started helping his father shaped in many ways his service leadership mindset. I liked this guy even before I met him. So hello, Rob, and welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the warm introduction. Hopefully we can maintain that level.
Oh, hey, you sure will. So one of the things that really impressed me and I like the most is kind of your service philosophy. If you don't mind to elaborate about it and share with us what's behind it.
I was born and raised in Sydney, Australia, and with immigrant parents. My father was from El Salvador, and my mother and her parents were from Malta in Europe. And a very blue-collar upbringing. My dad started work as a spray painter and eventually worked at IKEA, and then I worked with my two older brothers. We all followed him in the warehouse. And even early on, my grandparents were they were the janitors at our school, and growing up in primary school, and so it was never looked down upon to actually do the details and do the dirty work. I think it was expected to be done, and in my mind, those are kind of the atoms and the building blocks of what makes what builds something. And so that philosophy I just kind of carry through, that I wouldn't ask somebody in the team to do something that I wouldn't or couldn't do, and and try my best with that, and set an example for mindset in the company.
Yeah, and how does it show up in the day-to-day as a CEO years later?
It shows up in many ways, and I think in many unexpected ways. But when you have that kind of mindset, especially in a services company, but when things don't go as planned, then the ability of the team to react and respond to what's going on around them is really high, right? Because they're not afraid to say, "Well, someone else needs to do that." They're just, "Hey, it's all part of the service. If that's what's needed," and you can go way on the other end of the spectrum and look at someone like George Nelson, who's a very famous designer. And I think you see one of the clocks in the background there, right? But there's the famous quote he has, which is, "The details make the design." And I think when you apply that to a services perspective, it's little details and nuances that people take care of that make the end product what it is, the end experience, which is what service gives.
We spoke before about the upside down, the flipped organizational chart. What do you mean by that? How does it show up?
Yeah. Well, if I go back to starting the company, I started this company by actually teaching training courses. And I was an instructor, and a very good friend of mine from high school, Alex, was looking for work. And I brought him in as a student of one of my courses, and then I taught him how to teach, and then I was backing him up. And Alex is still with us today, right? We went on and taught many courses and grew from there. And I think the element was always building from the bottom and supporting people in their growth and supporting them as they go, and knowing that if they fall down, that you're there to catch them and you're there to help them. So it's this dual thing of believing in somebody so they set the bar higher than what they think they can meet, but then also reassuring them that, hey, you're there to catch them if something doesn't go as planned.
Recently I read the Aristotle Project, is the study that Google have done about the best performing teams.
Yep.
And one of the things that showed up is psychological safety in organization. I think that Amy Davidson actually spoke a lot about it, Harvard professor.
Yeah.
So, and we talked before about managing kind of optimal anxiety in organization. So in one hand, keep this psychological safety, and the other hand, actually not giving the drive. So can you share with us, how do you do that? What's your view about it? It's actually something very unique to you.
So I'm living here now in California. So I'm in Palo Alto, and everything's amazing. The weather's fantastic. And, 2020 is the year of endless giving of challenges for us, right? For everyone worldwide. And was kind of looking at what do we need to provide our teams, our Rocketeers, as we call them, so that they can be strong for themselves, they can be strong for their families, and they can be strong for their communities. And that's what's going to build, a better place for us to live in, right? And so going down to those building blocks, and I go through my journey of like, okay, how, obviously we're at our best when we are not overly stressed. But like a lot of people, if I don't have any kind of stress, then am I just going to sit at home and watch Netflix and kind of just let the world go by, right? And so to me, there was this optimal piece of stress, and that always played on, okay, how do we balance that? And when I see a lot of things, there's a lot of expectations on everybody in the world, right? Whether you're expected to be, on a personal level, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a son, I'm a grandson, right? Have all these expectations that are there. And but then at work, I'm a leader. What am I supposed to do? There's a pandemic, there's social unrest, there's inequality of race, there's inequality of sex and gender and all these different things. And the amount of things that somebody has to keep on top of to, I guess, quote unquote, be proper, for me was really frustrating. And I wanted to just get at the element of what causes that anxiety. And did a whole lot of really intelligent Googling, right? Reading, and a lot of work on psychology, and just trying to take in a lot of content. But I came across this very simple law. It's the Yerkes Dodson law. And so it's not my thing. It's very old. And it's a curve which basically says that, the more there's a peak amount of what they call arousal, which I'll call anxiety, and the vertical axis is about performance. And so in the middle, you can have an optimal amount of anxiety that gives you an optimal amount of performance. And if you have too much anxiety, you're way on the other curve and your performance goes down. And if you don't have enough, you're not going to perform at peak. And that very simple graph really resonated with me. And internally, we began this program of how do we reduce anxiety, right? So rather than promoting whatever the media was promoting, whatever was fashionable to as a hashtag or what have you to jump on, was how do we reduce anxiety? So if I come to work and as a Latino heritage immigrant, do I feel discriminated against? That's anxiety. How do I reduce that? If I come to work and I'm not healthy, that's anxiety. How do I reduce that? And what I didn't like about what is going on in the world is that social media is telling us what to be anxious about. And I want that to be a personal thing for everyone to say, hey, we've all got to get into the optimal space. And what causes anxiety for you might not cause anxiety for me. And my role as CEO is to create an environment where everybody can have an optimal amount of anxiety so they perform for themselves, right? For their families, for the company, and for the community. And so that's what the focus is on. And if the flavor of the month is, hey, we're going to focus on a particular social issue, that's okay, and bring awareness to it. But the more we bring awareness to sometimes these things, it actually causes anxieties in those people that are left out. And in any conflict in the world, there's two sides, at least, to every story. And what you do find is that when you push towards one end of the spectrum, you're pushing against another end of the spectrum. And so the focus became very personal, very within, for everyone to focus on that performance curve for them and what's causing them to either have too much anxiety or not enough, and gauging that measurement of what that is. And so, I continue to do a lot of work on that. And, it just keeps teaching me more lessons about, okay, that empathy and awareness of what causes somebody anxiety might bring me joy, right? And so every quarter we do a check-in process. And we used to do this kind of little 9-box, how are you performing and where do you rate yourself? And we changed that little graph to be that Yerkes Dodson curve, right? Where do you think you feel right now, right? And it's not a score that we measure you against. It's a way for your manager to empathize with you. So where are you feeling? Because if we understand where you're feeling, even if your performance is amazing, but you are feeling a lot of anxiety, then it's not sustainable. If your performance is amazing on my metrics, but you don't feel like you have enough anxiety, enough challenge, that's also a problem, right? Because you feel like you have more in the tank, and you're not being coached, and you're not being challenged enough to reach your full potential. And so it becomes a really good measurement, not just on business metrics, but also getting an understanding of where is, if it was a car, like where is the revolutions, the revs, and the fuel tank, where is everything at, so that we understand. It's a very personal thing. And two people with the same performance could have very different stress about it at different points in time. And so we check in, and it's just a continual process to just calibrate around that.
It's a beautiful process. It means that it's not just the responsibility of the employees to self-manage their anxiety. You see it as your role as a CEO to create an environment that help them to manage their anxiety, so that you will have a more safe environment that they can operate in their best.
Yeah. And if you dig into what is that safety, and there's many different ways to look at this. So my perspective right now, and I say right now because it evolves, right, is if someone can express how they feel about certain facts, we make progress. And so we're doing a lot of work right now on, hey, I feel frustrated, right, because the support ticket queue or the amount of proposals I need to write, or whatever it is very large. And it may be, I may perceive that it's because another team is not doing their work, right? But rather than shooting to solve that and shooting to pass the blame, trying to get people to focus on that discovery of what am I feeling and what facts do I see, right? What is my perspective that's causing that? And if you can express that, what will happen is that the other groups who read that will say, oh, okay, this is what it brings up for me, and this is what I see. And in many cases, things actually get solved very quickly, because I don't know many people, I don't know anyone at ServiceRocket, I don't know many people generally in the world that really get excited by annoying other people, right? I do know a lot of people, if they get told what they should do by somebody else all the time, they will resist that. So it's understanding that human behavior and saying, well, what I need to bring to the table if I have a problem is what are the facts that I see, and what does it bring up for me, right? And sometimes it may just be different perspective. Sometimes it's something that someone else is doing. And what happened last week when we did one of these sessions, it was someone totally different came out with a solution who wasn't either of those parties. It was like, wow, I see this and this, and I can do this part that will bring those two folks together and alleviate the pressure from both of them. And so right now I'm doing a lot of work in coaching people how to do that. And, I think business has really evolved. In previous generations, we could just focus on the numbers and the metrics and the dollars and say, everyone take your paychecks home and you decide what to do. Get your leadership from your churches or your communities or other places, wherever that is. And now more and more these days, technology has moved so far, society has changed very much. And what's looked upon from a leader in a company is how to be a great person and how to help people, get better. And in my mind, if I help a Rocketeer learn and grow, even if that means they leave the company and go somewhere else, that's a good thing, right? We've helped them on their journey and given them some tools and techniques that they'll use to make an impact. And one day we hope they'll come back and they'll help grow something even bigger for somebody else. And so it's a mindset for us of not only what do we do for our customers and what money do we put in people's pockets, but also how do we help them amplify their impact on, again, themselves, their families, the communities, and the company ultimately thrives from that.
So, you have matured through the last 19 years. How does CEO actually grows? Many of them don't manage to grow themselves with a company. What lesson you learned from growing with your company as a CEO?
I've been lucky to be a member of many organizations. I would say when I first started, even before I started the company, I would, when there were such things as bookstores, I would walk past the bookstore and see the self-help section, and my ego was as such, like, who needs that? Right? I'm already effective. Why do I need your habits? Right? So I think there's just a normal maturation process. And again, my upbringing wasn't heavily academic, right? Or there wasn't a lot of reading encouraged, and wasn't discouraged, but neither of my parents finished high school, right, down to grade 12. I remember the first kind of book that I got was like, Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. And when I was working for a training company in Silicon Valley before I started this, I was traveling to different cities around the US and teaching courses. And I would teach 5-day programming courses, and then I would have breakfast in the hotel, right? And I remember being in Colorado on a Saturday morning because the course had finished and I was having breakfast ready to go. And there was this gentleman who just kind of put me onto some books and said, hey, you should really check this out. And so I said, okay, I've got nothing to do. I'll start reading. And so that had an impact on just, okay, I'm sitting on the plane, I'm starting to read some stuff. This is interesting. Of course, those books are written about other people, not me, because I don't have any issues, right? And throughout the company, I managed to get involved in an organization called EO, the Entrepreneurs Organization. And I'm still a member of EO today, and EO and subsequently YPO have been fantastic resources. And it's those organizations do a lot, but it's really the mentorship aspect. And if there's one word, it's mentorship. And there are kind of 3 levels that you need to think about is who's teaching you, who is a peer to you, and who are you teaching? And you get value out of all 3, right? And even now, I 2 years ago, I started a journey learning how to swim and do triathlons, and it's the same thing. I have coaches and mentors, I have peers, and then I have people that I'm also helping. And that pattern, again, in generations past, some of the social institutions like churches and other community aspects took care of some of these things. With the way that society has changed, I think a lot of people, are hungry. Maybe they don't have that mentorship path, right? And there are so many awesome people in this company that I'm happy to have sit next to me and like, hey, I'll show you what I'm working on, right? As long as there's no privacy data. Hey, this is what I'm doing, and this is the way I think about things, and tell me what's going on, right? And being accessible and open like that is, I think, of the mentors that I've had, that have had such a huge impact on some very basic concepts of what they've taught me or said. And I think that's really invaluable. And I don't think when it comes down to it, those are the fun parts of business. When someone comes back to you and says, I had one 2 days ago of someone that's leaving, and that person in Malaysia said to me, I don't forget the talk we had where I told him that there's no problem with being a support engineer. Because generally in IT, if you're in support, there's this general concept that you're in support until you can go to engineering or until you can go to consulting or do something else. And this young Rocketeer loved doing support, but felt anxiety of the external perceptions and pressures that he has to get on and do something else. And I chatted with him saying, if you love what you're doing and you're getting better at it and you can train other people to do it, then that's a great career. There's nothing wrong with that. Don't feel like you have to throw it away and do something else because that's everyone else's expectations. And you can make a lot of money doing that. Like there's no limitation with what's there. And the relief that it gave him. And when you realize, when you double click into that anxiety that goes to him, how am I going to provide for my young family? What am I going to be doing? And the impacts that those little things can have are significant. And so I think being accessible is also important because, I would rather be accessible to someone in Malaysia at 1 a.m. who reaches out and asks a question because it's giving them that anxiety, and be able to help them. And if I'm busy sleeping, I just won't answer. But if I get up at 3 a.m. for a drink of water and I see it, I'll answer, right? And I would much rather be of service to my team like that than to say, don't call me, don't contact me, I'm undisturbable, I'm working on really important things. I go back to those basic elements at the beginning, which are the atoms, right? If my support engineers, the guys and girls working with the customers, have any kind of negative anxiety, and I can do anything to help relieve that, then I should. Now, the MBA advice comes in saying, well, isn't it better for you to do more important things with your time? And, I'm like, yeah, but by doing that, I spot patterns. And as a CEO, my job is to spot the patterns of the business and work ahead to clear up those things. So I get the signals. And if something keeps happening, yeah, it's my job to help design and build and work with the team to, okay, if I'm getting lots of really basic questions, then something's wrong, right? There's some flaw in the system. If I don't do that, maybe a whole bunch of people leave and we don't know, right? So that's some of the way that resonates and manifests.
That's great, especially when you mentioned about mentor and being mentored. So, Rob, thank you so much for being with us today. It was a great pleasure.
Oh, happy to be here. I could do another 4 hours. So
I'm sure you do. And thank you for watching this show. And I'm looking forward to see you in the next episode.
Okay, no problem. And if anyone wants to reach out, you can find me on LinkedIn and reach out to me. Thank you for having me.